Morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whatever time of day, thanks for joining us here on A Word with Adam. I'm standing right now on Hallett Cove Beach, one of the most picturesque spots we have in South Australia. But every day, places like this come under attack from the biggest threat they have, man-made rubbish. That's why today I'm going to be sitting down with the two founders of the Adopt a Spot scheme to hear about how they're impacting the South Australian environment and to find out more about the statistics, like the fact that last year in 2020, they collected nearly 5 tonnes of rubbish from places just like this. Please welcome Carlee Lynch and Chris. Guys, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
I guess I want to start with, before we even get into how and why all this began, I want to talk about the big number right off the bat. You recently did a big cleanup where you collected a whole bunch of cigarette butts. Yeah. Can I get just for the people at home, what was the astronomical number of butts that you got and the percentage that are actually being put in the bin as opposed to being dropped?
So over a 20-day period, a friend and I, we did a butt survey on a section of the mid-coast here where we've had 8 purpose-built butt bins installed. And during the course of the 20 days, we collected 1,555 butts in total in that small section. And we only had 19 were in the butt bins altogether, and only one of them didn't have a plastic filter attached to the butt. So because the cigarette butts are made out of plastic, our number one single-use plastic item, and I was asked by the council what percentage of butts are we getting out of the butt bins, and it worked out on that survey to be 1.2%.
1.2?
Yeah, of butts.
Wow.
Being put in the bin.
So do you think they're getting dropped because people do think they're recyclable, or just laziness, or what?
There's a few reasons. They're getting used to throwing them on the ground. What's happened with smokers is slowly but surely we've pushed them out into the environment. They can't smoke indoors in a restaurant, anywhere like that. So where they get pushed out into the streets where there's no facilities, they've just grown into the habit of throwing them on the ground. They look left, they look right, no one's looking, and they drop them. And so when you do put a butt bin there, they're just not so used to looking at it. Unless it's within a metre of them, they're just not seeing them. And that's one of the biggest problems that we've got. It's our number one item that we pick up throughout the state.
Do you think in terms of cigarettes that one of the best things could be done would be actually look at it as a single-use plastic, like we've done with straws and cutlery, and try to move away perhaps from plastic filters to bamboo or something like that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, we're the state that's going to ban single-use plastics, and that's the number one item. So I'm hoping that we force the hand of the tobacco industry into coming up with a compostable alternative. And probably something that we should have done to start with is we should have started telling smokers where they can smoke rather than where they can't smoke, because that has been the problem. Is 3 million a day in the environment. So even if they're and only 30% are disposed of thoughtfully, and even those ones that are disposed of thoughtfully still go to landfill and never be part of the circular economy. So they just don't tick a single box in this state anyway. And they last up to 11 years if they're in UV. If they're in UV, but once they're waterlogged and sink into the ocean and the UV light doesn't penetrate, they'll last for 100 years until they're eaten or eaten by bacteria or whole. People find them in fish stomachs. They'll gut a fish and there'll be cigarette butts in there.
Yeah, it's just got to be something you absolutely want when you're cutting open your fish for dinner. Is cigarette butts falling out.
That's right. So that's what some of the strategies that I've got, and we can put an environmental tax on them as well as another idea. Everything's centred around the health scene, but we could put a 5% environmental tax and use that for programs. And unfortunately, we're so centred on recycling. All the focus is put onto that, but there's only 10% of plastic ever gets recycled. The other 90% is still out there, and a lot of it's cigarette butts.
Was it cigarette butts primarily that made you decide to start the Adopt a Spot scheme, or what was the catalyst for the two of you to get into the environmental cause in this way?
I think it's single-use plastics in general, but the scheme started with Chris. He called a Clean Up Australia Day Clean in 2017. Well, did you want to explain why you...
Well, I'm part of the Mid-Coast Surf and Reserve Committee, so out the front here we've got 9 kilometres of surf breaks. And
so that's just here in Seaford in South Australia.
Just in Seaford, yeah. It goes from Christie Creek to Pedlar Creek in Moana. And we called for the clean-up. I took on the environmental part, and Carlee was present at that first clean as well. And we chose one end each in a group, and the idea was we were going to head towards each other and meet in the middle, but we never actually got out of the first car parks we were in. There was so much litter in the allotted time that you got for Clean Up Australia Day. after that day, I got talking with Carlee, who was then representing Take 3 for the Sea, and I said, you know, why don't we all just grab a surf break each and make it our own? So I put the call out on the Mid-Coast Surfing Reserve page, and we all the surf spots along here soon got snapped up really quickly, and that wasn't that much hard work actually. And so volunteers come to nominate their own surf spots. But what happened was people that didn't have surf spots that were surfers wanted to go and clean up out the front of Glenelg or somewhere south.
I think the community really embraced the idea, and I think, Chris, you summarised it perfectly when you said you wanted to do something that wasn't so tokenistic, as amazing as it is to get people out to do a group clean. What happens in between those, 12-month group cleans or even monthly group cleans? So this idea to adopt a place that you love and want to care for and conduct these regular cleans and then be able to feed the data back gives it purpose.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we were at Christie's Beach and we'd been given a grant to install the 63 butt bins, and by then the group was really big, and we just decided on the steps there while we were in front of the camera getting this to suddenly change the name from Adopt a Surf Break, and Carlee said, no, we've got to change it to Adopt the Spot, and we changed it right then and there, and it's been that way ever since. And now we've got 160 adopters and 300 odd volunteers, primary schools. But we don't only collect rubbish, it's more about data collection than it is rubbish really. We're starting to use it more for that because Carlee runs the education and sustainability
Yeah,
side.
we created 3 founding pillars that really drive the scheme. So we had the waste management and the data collection, which is actually going out and conducting the cleans and reporting back with the findings, which then we can use to send back to local council and government and businesses and actually create some change. It gives the cleans purpose, like I mentioned. And then we've got our education pillar and our sustainability pillar. So it's introducing sustainable practices, and it's also going out and educating our community and our school children, which is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does it work? So say I want to volunteer. What's the process, and then what does it entail for me as a volunteer?
Right, so you find a spot that you're passionate about, and I should point out here as well, we only started off as marine debris, but we've since learnt that the further inland you go, the more good you do, to be honest.
Yeah.
So you can find a spot that you like that could be a piece of beach, a riverbank or a creek, a walking trail, a park, anywhere inland, and you just register with us. We've got a training video that we got a grant from SA Water for to produce. Sign up to the scheme once you've assessed the risks, and then you just go out whenever it suits you best. It could be weekly, it could be fortnightly, a month. Some people go every day and just report back, and all you do is you just take a photograph of what you've picked up, loosely laid out. You can count the cigarette butts and the lids because they're target items at the moment. You don't have to count them, you can just leave them separated in the picture and we'll count them from the picture. But that picture that you take will go into your own personal album. So if you've got a problem, well, let's talk about the Christie's Beach gross pollutant trap, for instance. Our adopter there, we've got such a body of evidence that we can just go into the council and say, well, this is what's happening just at that spot there. And it can be, rather than, let's say, oh, we're picking up a million butts. A million butts doesn't mean anything. Could be 2 million, could be 5 million. It doesn't relate to anything, but show a picture of 1,000 butts weekly in the same spot, and it's got a lot of impact. So, and it's worked because they've raised the height of the drum, they clean it more regularly. And that's a sort of similar story right way around the whole coastline. The whole point of adopting a spot is that one person who's passionate about that spot takes it on board. So we say that they act by cleaning it up, they educate themselves on what it is they're finding and where it's coming from, and then they go to council or to government with some sustainable options so that it's not just, they've done their research and here's the backup proof, and we keep a photo portfolio of every adopter that signs up, specific just to that one little stretch. Yep. The number one thing we pick up is these small plastic pieces that you see here. So they're fragments of anything, milk crates, cigarette lighters, so they're just broken fragments. They're not quite microplastics. Microplastics are 5 mil and smaller, so that's what we pick up the most. But of the most identifiable items that we find, which means that where we can trace back the origin, is the cigarette butts, the cellulose acetate, and then the number 2 item is PET bottle lids.
Do you find as well, like just talking about things like that with plastics, you don't really think about? I know a lot of people don't actually realise that aluminum cans, or aluminium cans I should say, are actually coated in clear plastic underneath the actual can itself. Yeah. So how do we, you mentioned earlier like a circular economy, how do you see the circular model working?
From my point of view is we follow the 4 rules of refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle. And there's a reason why recycle is number 4 on the hierarchy of control, because that means when you've exhausted all other avenues. But if we can get a society to start refusing, like walk into a shop and say, well, I'm not going to buy that one because it's covered in plastic, I'm going to buy this one. So you can refuse it outright, but you can also reduce the amount. For instance, let's say spray and wipe, there's a common household problem. You can buy 1 spray bottle and a 5-litre container and keep filling the container up. Or you can buy 6 spray bottles and throw them all out after a week. So there's an idea of someone that's reducing. And reusing, you use, say, the containers for, let's say we have ice cream in it, but then it can go into the shed rather than buy all those plastic drawers that only last a year and you've got to throw them out again. Whereas so that's just an idea of how you do it.
It all links back to education. I think that's why it's one of our founding pillars. It's so important because you don't know what you don't know. And you pointed out with the Coke bottle, it's the same with a lot of the coffee cups as well, have the plastic inside. So I think most people want to do the right thing. We just need to educate on better ideas of how to do the right thing.
Absolutely. Do you think there's possibly even an avenue for businesses to look at, like I know the one that comes to my mind is who gives a crap, the toilet paper, recycled toilet paper, the cardboard inside is recyclable and it's packed in brown paper instead of plastic. That's the kind of aim we're looking for ultimately, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we can even go in with toilet paper, that is the sort of thinking you can get, but there's stores starting to up now. One of our adopters actually from the Brighton area started up a store called Bear Pantry, and that's where you go in with a glass jar and they fill up your glass jar for you, and it's like we've got it here, washing detergent, pasta, all sorts of different
fantastic.
Kitchen ideas and laundry ideas, and they sell a shampoo and a cake rather than in plastic bottles, and the cake lasts for ages. You can really do a lot in the laundry and in the bathroom if you go to stores like that. But there's the resources that are out there. There's another lady who's a part of our group. Her name's Laura Carrington, and her and her crew run Refuse, Reduce, Reuse, Recycle Facebook page, and there's just ideas flooding in there all the time. And you can ask a question as well on there, and you'll get so many answers. What I'd like to see is the state start refusing stuff though. That's what I'd really like to see. I'd like to see a government that would come in and say, well, there's our number 1 item. I know we've touched on it before, and just say, well, we're not letting those into our state. And all the ideas will come out, all the entrepreneurial people will see an opening, and before long you wouldn't have even known it was an issue, because people will just get onto it.
Well, that's something I've noticed, especially down like the party and picnic aisle at supermarkets now. There's not really plastic plates, there's not plastic cutlery anymore, it's all made from either bamboo, or I know hemp is coming a long way as well as a substitute for paper and plastic, and being a lot more recyclable and a lot more durable. Aside from adopting a spot, what is it that the community as a whole can do to attempt to eliminate this?
The impact needs to be taught, the impact of it, along with the sustainability. So some of the stories about how plastic even come about is amazing, because it's nothing to do with convenience or anything like that. It's just oil companies and big business trying to make a profit. And everyone learns in business school that you need, the way to a fortune is to come up with an item that is disposable and convince everybody that that's what they need. Because that's where all the money is, and we just need to educate people to look out for that.
I think it links back to when you're talking about culture, consumerism as a whole, and if we're looking at straws, for example, we've replaced plastic straws with other straws, but do we actually need a straw? I know there's some people that do need to use a straw, but do we actually need a straw? And how do we have these conversations in our communities? And I know for me, for one, having 2 young children, we go to birthday parties all the time. And for me, that's like a prime example of, we've got balloons, we've got party bags, we've got all this stuff. And I think, do we actually need all that stuff? Or is there a way that we can consume less or think differently about how we do things? And that's just one example. How do we have these conversations, and how do we find new ways to think about how and why we're doing things so that we're not consuming, because at the end of the day, while using reusable items is great, it's still using something, and the first thing is to actually refuse and use less. So how do we make the things that we buy count and purposeful, and not just be part of this, I guess, system where people want to keep buying, and that goes back to consumerism and marketing. And
I was going to say advertising, absolutely.
Advertising,
Coke
absolutely.
advertising
And whose responsibility
dominant.
is it? Because to me, I'm like, it's us as consumers, but it's also the people that are doing the advertising and the corporation and the government. We all actually need to come together collectively and look at this, and it goes across all industries. So I think education is a massive thing that we need to focus on. I like to use the tap analogy. I feel like at the moment there's all this talk about recycling, which is great, and there's a definite purpose and place for it. But for me, I look at if we've got a tap and the tap's dripping out water, and I feel like there's so many people arguing about which bucket we're going to use to catch the water and where the water's going to go and what type of bucket it's in, where we actually need to focus our energy on turning off the tap and stopping the flow. So I guess that is probably the end goal for our scheme. You know, we want our adopters to feel like they have purpose and that we're making progress, and you know that they're not always going to have to be picking up. So yeah, that is our end vision.
If people weren't cleaning these areas up and this was all just sitting there piling up, is it the waterways that get the most affected by it? Is it the stormwater that gets the most affected? Where are we seeing most of this stuff end up if it's not cleaned?
For an example, in this area here, if you drop a cigarette butt in the car park at Colonnades, Noongar, that will get washed out onto the beach at Christie's Beach. So that means everything else that's out there, when it rains, goes into the gutter, goes then down into the side entry pit and works its way through the sewers until it gets congregated into that gross pollutant trap that I was telling you about before. If you go to Christie's Creek, there's 92 stormwater exits into the creek. Only 4 have got gross pollutant traps, but they only catch the big things. So the creek, so you'll get this rain, 30 mil of rain is all it takes, and it'll fill the gross pollutant trap at Christie's Beach, and that'll be full. It will need to be emptied because it's designed so that when it's full, the water goes around it and straight out onto the beach, so none of that's getting picked up out of there. So you've got, say, like a plastic bucket in the creek, someone's thrown it away, it's got a hole in it, it'll come down with one rain and get so far, then it'll snap into 2 pieces, and then it'll go down and snap into 3 pieces, 4 pieces, and then that's how it ends up like that. And it's not just in this area. I've singled us out a bit over this journey, but I shouldn't have, because Young Street, Edward Street and Wattle Street at Brighton are all exactly the same. And the Edward Street drain, that empties out onto where all the hooded plovers are feeding and nursing. Yeah, the adopters are doing a fantastic job there, and they've been taking some really powerful photos that have gone around the world, really.
I think all roads lead to the sea. So that's why it's equally effective to be inland doing collections as on the beach, because you're preventing it from its journey down. Are you
finding that, you know, through, like, we're talking metrics and things like that you guys take, with all this obviously being collected before it can hit the ocean, are we finding that the oceans are getting cleaner, or are we still massively fighting an uphill battle, even though there are, you know, hundreds of volunteers going out every week to pick things up?
No, it's an uphill battle, because if you think of one drain, that's one person, and it's congregating from lots of different areas just to come out there. At Christie's Creek, we're still pulling out pieces of plastic from 30 years ago. We found a mellow yellow cap at the beginning. That was taken over by, that was changed to lift in 1999. So we found one of those. We found a Medicare card from 1997. We found soft plastics from the 80s, Arnott's chip packet, expiry date 1982, Mars bar 1987, Crunchy bar 1992. So it's just still coming. It's all trapped up there, and the rain is washing it further and further down.
And as long as it's being produced, we're going to be picking it up.
Yeah, it takes up valuable space, especially in bird life, because it takes up valuable space in their stomach. So if they're used to going out for 2 days and collecting food, if their stomach's full of plastic, they won't be able to eat enough food or carry enough water to go out there and feed, because it'll be still in there. It takes up the space. And when those birds eventually die out to sea and their carcasses start to rot, all those bits of plastic that are in their stomach just floats to the top and it all starts again. So our whole idea is you get like a high tide, and then as the tide recedes, get down to your spot, because you get to know your spot because it's your own personal spot, and you know when the most rubbish is going to be there. So the idea is to pick up as much as you can and get rid of it, so that when the tide comes back in, it doesn't pick the same stuff up and take it back for another journey.
As we've been talking about this, my head's been running through all the things you don't think about as single-use plastics. Like say the wrapper, the biscuits comes in, the Mars bar wrappers, like everything seems to come, with the exception of maybe some ice blocks that I can think of, everything comes wrapped in plastic, not paper. Is paper, surely paper's the better way to go, longer on a hemp or something, something stronger but that's biodegradable, yeah?
Yeah, if it can break down back to natural elements, yeah, I guess that is better than plastic.
Even bulk buying, so if you are going to go and buy, say, a packet of chips, buying the large one rather than buying the one that's the big one with then 10 packets inside, so it's about everyone's small decisions. I like to say small decisions accumulate, so you do the best with what you can. I know everyone's on a different journey. That's a small step in the right direction.
It should be a lot cheaper to buy a cup of coffee in your own cup than what it is to buy one made of plastic and lids and that. And that all comes around to about just legislating it in the right way. You know, we change rules and laws so that it's more economical, so that all the people that are being successful are the ones that are using alternatives.
Yep.
And all the ones that are lagging behind and making a mess, shouldn't be profitable.
There's a question of how do we exit all the existing products that we have. So if we were to say we're going to put a blanket ban on all these plastic items as of today, we've still physically got them. So what do we do with them? How do we actually get rid of them?
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah, it surely is, yeah. And but we've got a fantastic group of volunteers. It's surprising when you just sit back and wait for people to come to you, the quality of people that you get. Some of them are my best friends now. I never knew them 2 years ago. So they just come out of the woodwork, and there's lots of people out there that are cleaning the beach anyway. And if they're seeing this, I'd like to say to them, you know, you probably should think about joining someone like us, because if they just keep going out and picking up rubbish and not saying anything, then nothing will change. It'll always, you know,
people are just assuming.
But if they were to say, well, I pick up at this section of the beach every day of the week, I say, well, share what you're picking up with us. We'll put it on the pile and we'll take all that information and try and
Are you finding that the photo albums you talked about, are you finding they're a really powerful tool for people to look back, but also to show to people to say, look, there's a photo album?
Yeah, the way that come about was a stroke of genius. That just came from nowhere, but it was one of Carlee's ideas, I must say, where she separated the spots into photo albums. And before, we were just posting on the Facebook page. And so if you wanted to find a post, you're scrolling for ages, and so it all got sort of organised like that. But then people started to take ownership of their own album, so you can get a link to it. They can click on their own album themselves and scroll down, see what they've done for the day, compare their own photos.
Are you finding that you're getting more traction with government places? Are you getting government interest and government support, or are we still lacking that kind of proper government support that this needs?
It's a slow journey, and I think a lot of the feedback that we are given is that we require data. So Chris, very funnily, last week I think said, what's the magic number? You know, what do we need to pick up before it'll be obvious that there is an issue? So while we understand they need to build a bigger picture, how long do we need to continue to provide data? Like,
what's the number?
Yeah, how long's a piece of string? What's that magic
You
number?
tell me how many cigarette butts we have to pick up before you'll take it seriously. We'll tell you when we get there.
It is probably in the too hard basket for a lot of people.
And I think
slow moving.
I think with politicians as well, at times they don't want to be involved in a problem that is too hard to be solved. They don't want to be associated with it, if you know what I mean. Talking even to council, it was hard work, just 5 emails with no answers, and we actually did get a little bit radical at the beginning, but it turned out to be the best thing that we did. We went ahead and started the scheme, and we put plastics ashtrays at every surf break after 2 or 3 weeks of trying to explain what we wanted to do. And in the end, they kept popping up, and a councillor happened to walk past and say, what are all these ashtrays doing here? And then they got back to us who it was, and they called us into the office to say, well, what's going on? And I was able to say, well, we wanted to work with you, but no one. But once they saw what they were doing and listened, and ever since that day, they've been fantastic. Onkaparinga Council have been really good to us. There's no doubt about that. So once you break the ice, they tend to think, oh yeah, these guys, they've been around, they know what they know what they're doing. It's not just us talking; it's 300 people talking and contributing and putting their take on it.
What do you hope we're going to see in 4 years' time with more people adopting spots and more community knowledge about this going on? Do you think we will start seeing an impact, or are we still 10 to 15 years away from a real significant?
I'm optimistic about it. I think consumer culture is really changing, and I think for us, our biggest opportunity is to continue to go into our schools and educate. I think the next generation is really going to be the pioneers and drive a lot of change. So going in there and providing them with tools, and if we can keep collecting our data in the background to support this change, yeah, definitely optimistic, but also realistic that it's going to be a slow process. So
yeah, because you're fighting big business, and they're very resistant to change.
We want to shift the culture as well, and it's about taking everyone on the journey and not isolating any particular individuals or group, but everyone coming together to collectively do something to, yeah.
So I guess if we're talking brass tacks, and every individual is responsible for the environment on a certain level, we're all responsible at least for the environment of mess that we create. What is the one thing, or the golden rule, I guess, everybody could do to help make the biggest change?
To get into the mindset of refusing plastic at every opportunity. And it doesn't mean that you're going to not ever buy plastic again, but if you're in the mindset of refusing it, and if you can't, you'll go down to the next level of refusing to buy so much, and so on and so on.
I would absolutely agree with what Chris said, but what I would love to share is a phrase that Chris brought to the scheme, and it's called kuleana. It's a Hawaiian term, and loosely translated it means privilege responsibility, and I think that's something that I think of every day. It's our privilege to have this beautiful mid-coast and our oceans, and where we live, we're so lucky to live here, and it's our responsibility to take care of our environment and do the right thing. So I think taking that mentality everywhere that you go.
Well, again, thank you to Chris and Carlee for joining us here today. The information on the screen right here is where you need to go if you want to adopt a spot. Help us change South Australia for the better.